welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EN World. I'm your host, Jessica, but I'm the least interesting person here because this week we have two fantastic guests joining us. We have Jay and B here to talk with us about their game of Fool's Errand. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Stoked to be here.
You sent me the press release for this game and it sounded so interesting. I had to have you on to talk about it. Just so folks know, the Kickstarter campaign is live currently at the time of recording. It has 4 days left and is so teasingly close to funding. It's like 97, 98%. So if you are watching or listening to this and it sounds in any way interesting, please go and back because it would be fantastic to just kick it over the finish line. That would be really great. But tell you what, why don't you both introduce yourself and you kind of background with games and what you've worked on with the project. So Jay, would you like to introduce yourself and how you're involved with the Fool's Errand?
Absolutely. My name is Jay Stroutman. I am a game designer. I'm also a professional musician and audio person based in Toronto. The audio thing is important because I co-host and co-created a podcast called Planet Arcana with B, which is where we got the inspiration for A Fool's Errand. So I'm the lead designer for the game. I have designed other games before, and I am, this is the first game that I've done at this scale, so I'm very excited and feeling really jazzed about everything.
Fantastic. And B, what about yourself?
Hi, I'm B. Marsolier. I am the other co-creator and co-host of the podcast that the game was inspired by. And I'm also an illustrator. For Fool's Errand, I'm taking on the role of a designer, and I'm also the art director.
Beautiful. Well, we'll get into the game and talk about all the artwork and the ideas behind it. With the podcast you talk about, is it planetarcana.com? Is that, if people are interested in finding links to that, is that the best place to go?
Yes, that's perfect.
Beautiful. I'll put that links in the chat as well, so you can check that out. Or if you're listening to the podcast, it'll be there as well. Fab. So let's be nosy and talk about you as people before we talk about the game, because that's always what I like to do. So Jay, do you remember the first tabletop RPG that you played?
Sort of. I remember the idea of how I felt when I was playing RPGs when I was like 16 or so. And it felt, the important part of it was more the social aspect, getting together with my friends. So I don't necessarily remember the RPG part of it, but then I had a long break from it between starting it when I was a teenager and then trying it again in my 20s. And I've been like chasing that feeling and have accomplished that. But I think the first game I played was 3.5 D&D. Way back in the day.
Fantastic. And B, what about yourself?
Likewise, there was a couple of forays into character creation in session zeros and 3.5 in my early teen days. And then in my 20s, late 20s, picked up D&D 5e, played a years-long campaign with Jay GMing it, and then tried my hand at jamming and immediately launched into doing the podcast after that.
Okay. So my next question is generally, how did you go from being somebody who's like a fan of the hobby and plays to creating games? And it feels like we're leaning into that topic already, because it sounds like the podcast started and then this was birthed out of the podcast. Is that the right sort of assumption?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's dead on.
So tell me a bit more about the podcast. Like what is it and how is it linked to A Fool's Errand? Because you mentioned you started with Dungeons and Dragons. This game is very much not Dungeons and Dragons and feels very different. So I'd love to know kind of that journey that took you there.
Yeah, so when we started Planet Arcana, the podcast, like B said, we had been it was off the heels of a very long 5e campaign. And we weren't super familiar with indie TTRPGs at the time, woefully, I would add. And when we started Planet Arcana, it was a 5e campaign, and it is a 5e campaign. It is still going. We're in our 80s, like the 80th episode or something like that.
Oh wow! I think the characters are just like all like veteran.
We're in our 80s.
I mean, I love it as a concept, but yeah, that's fine. 80th episode, amazing. So long running.
I was going to say, if you do like that, there is a character who I think you'll really like in it, but
excellent. Good.
But yeah, we started this campaign and none of it is what I would call vanilla D&D. Everything was completely from the ground up. From the races, we completely got rid of those and made a brand new concept for that. And we completely reflavored a brand new world, which I would say barely fits into the rule set of D&D. And that was 3 years ago that we started that. So this world has been in development for that long. And then the world became so big in concept that it started to eclipse the actual the system that we were using. So it was almost like a natural, I don't think either of us had the idea. It just had to be. We had to make a game system that was this world because it's just growing too large for what it's trying to be, which is a D&D campaign.
Amazing. And what is the setting? So let's lean in and start talking about A Fool's Errand. What is this world be? I don't know if you can speak to that and introduce us to this landscape.
For sure. So A Fool's Errand is a science fantasy world at its most basic. It also has some elements of urban fantasy, and it's a world that's populated by androids and humans who there's no hierarchy between them. They're equal in this world. And in fact, the world has been along for so long that the origins of both humans and androids is not known. So one could have predated the other. There are also people who exist somewhere in between the two. So androids with human parts and humans with android parts. And then the other big thing to know about the universe is that the pantheon of gods are the major arcana of the tarot deck. So that's where the tarot theming comes into play, both mechanically and thematically, because you do in fact play the game with a deck of tarot cards as well.
Fantastic. So how did you get from D&D to tarot cards? Because they're very different mechanically. How did that journey get there?
Yeah, good question.
I mean, I'm curious.
It was one of the first things that we conceptualized for the world. I remember that we were going to. I've never been super inspired by the pantheon. That, not to say it's good or bad. It's just it's never quite grabbed me, the pantheon of that's given to you in D&D, because I think it's so piecemeal from so many different types of world lore, which is cool in its own right. But I think very early on, it was one of the very first ideas we had for the world at all was we both are really into tarot, and a way to marry that was to bring in the major arcana as the gods of the world. So we didn't find that along the way. That was almost like an inception point, I think, of the entire world.
Beautiful. And we mentioned the gods have an important role in this world and are obviously inspired by the tarot arcana. But what is their role in the world like? Because when people include gods and pantheons in their games, like you mentioned, they can look kind of very different. So what does it look like in your game?
I think for most people in the world, the major arcana are accepted, but not necessarily entirely present in your life, and are conceptualized as gods representing one facet of the mortal experience. So each of these archetypes is present within every living person, and it sort of helps guide the spirituality of the world. For the players of A Fool's Errand, they have a very different relationship with the major arcana because they are in fact major arcana themselves. We call our players the fools, and the entire game is about the group of fools going on a journey to see the world. And the major arcana are very invested in this because the fool is the only major arcana who may see the world, which is the last major arcana card. So along the adventure, they entreat you, they reach into your adventure, they try to warn you, they try to beg you, they try to get involved, and they want your love and your favor. And so they do appear very personally and very frequently within the game. And that comes up both thematically and mechanically as you draw a major arcana card from the deck that you've made for your character.
Amazing. Well, I think we need to get into the weeds of the structure of how we play the game for sure. Because I love the structure. It seemed like a very clean, nice structure that kind of teaches you how the game works as well. But before we dive into that, I'd love to talk about, you mentioned the fools, the characters. So when we sit down to play the game, who are we? What beings are we going to be playing?
So yeah, you start as fools, and like B said, that means that you are major arcana, but an unrealized potential version of the major arcana, because the fool is the zeroth card of the major arcana, the zero representing infinite potential. So you start as, you can decide as a group whether or not you'd like to know that you're fools, or maybe you find that along the way in the journey. But regardless, you start as a fool. And yeah, you tether your fools to 3 different major arcana. And these will inform different motivations for your character. And they will also inform which major arcana will show up most often in your adventure. Because like B said, every time you draw it from your deck, something funky happens. Either like a heightening, or something bad, or something good, kind of depending on the relationship that you have worked on with this major arcana. And after so much of them, after they show up so many times, you have a choice to make with them, whether or not you're going to give them what they want and indulge them, or deny them. And whatever you choose, one major arcana is going to do something destructive. And it might be the major arcana that you're close with because you've denied them and cut them off. Or it might be a different major arcana because you've indulged this major arcana, you've got closer with them, and one of your other major arcana is jealous. So basically you're playing this balancing game of trying to decide which major arcana you want to satisfy, because regardless of what you do, one major arcana is going to calamitize the world over and over and over until you reach the end of your campaign.
Wonderful. I mean, that leads me really nicely into the structure of the game, talking about, as you nicely call it, the big ups, which I enjoyed very much reading about it. But yeah, could you walk us through kind of the structure, and it starts with the kind of the big ups when you were talking through it?
Yeah, the big oops. We have one in our podcast. And when we were first designing the game, we were thinking of including that as a established part of the lore. And then we sort of had this aha moment where we realized that we should let everybody establish their own big oops as part of the session 0 of the game. And that in order to do that, you would need to decide what was gained or what was lost. Was a formerly existing major arcana deleted from the pantheon during this event, or was a previously non-existent major arcana added to the pantheon? And how did that affect the world? And whatever it was a huge calamity, and in fact, like the biggest calamity the world has ever known. So once the table establishes that, including which major arcana were involved at the time, were they dueling, were they collaborating, you also establish how long after your big oops does your campaign start. Is it minutes? Is it weeks? Is it centuries? So that, I guess, gets everybody invested and gives everybody an equal share of the lore of the world when you're first starting the game.
Yeah. And does the book give you some kind of guidance in this, or is it completely freeform, or whatever you'd like? How do we decide what the big ups is? Because it sounds like it could be many things.
There are very structured prompts in the book. It literally starts with, was a major arcana deleted or added to the pantheon? And then you choose one of those, and then you get prompts based on your decision. So while it's very interpretive, it is very guided. After you decide whether the major arcana was added or deleted, then there's prompts to determine what the relationships of the other gods were at the time. So like B said, whether they were dueling or collaborating, and what either was destroyed or created as a result of their relationship between themselves.
Nice. That sounds good. So it feels like you're not having to come up with something completely. You're getting like prompts, but like you say, with tarot, it's so open to interpretations. So many people could see the same thing and have totally different interpretations, I guess.
Exactly.
I love that. Okay, so we established what this calamity was and when it happens as part of our session 0. Where do we go from there?
You want to take it, Jay?
Yeah, sorry. I thought I got confused. Yeah. The best part about the session 0, doing it together and finding the calamity together, is that it's also a way for the GM to just listen to the players and find out exactly what they want. When I run when I run one shots of the game, I still include the big oops creation, because I'll spend an hour just listening to the players create this world and create conflicts. And I don't have to think of that at all, because they already know what they want to solve, or what they want to find, or what they want to accomplish. So I'll listen to them talk for an hour, And then I'll just run that. I'll just tell them that they're a couple steps away from the thing that they've been, theorizing or developing in their big oops construction. So the next part of play is to just drop your characters in, and you can do one shots, but the game definitely is built for campaign play. About 6 to 8 sessions. So yeah, you go right from your big oops, and then you create your characters, and then you explore the world that you've created together.
Beautiful. And how long does character creation take? So is it because we briefly mentioned it goes into character creation, we have our motivations and things, but what else is included when we're building a character?
So yeah, motivations would be one of the first steps, definitely. You're also, as part of character creation, going to be picking your make and model. So in our world, that would be human, android, of which there are 3 varieties. There's also equine, human, and composite beings. So either you're an android with human parts, aka a symbiote, or a human with android parts, aka a modded human. And then there's Gears androids, cloud androids, steam androids. Each have sort of like some aesthetic and mechanical perks. Afterwards, you're going to start constructing your deck, which are going to inform what you're drawing. Your Major Arcana cards are going to go in there, but also what skills you are going to be quite proficient at and struggle a little bit with. Jay, do you want to pick it up from here?
Yeah, totally. You also pick 2 archetypes, which is kind of like playbooks, and you mash them together. From the 6 available, we have influencer, inquirer, operator, outlaw, protector, and virtuoso. So you pick 2 of those, you mash them together, you get all the level 1 abilities from them. And then, like B said, you get this list of skills that's dependent on which suits you pick for your deck. Your deck is made, you have archetypes, you have your make and model. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It is robust, I would say. Usually session 0, making the big oops and character creation, that's your whole session. So often when I run a one shot, I'll bring pre-generated characters.
Sure.
We'll make the big oops together, and then the characters will just pick their motivations and their major arcana, and everything else is selected from them, all their skills, all their archetypes, etc.
Great. And I guess, like you say, if it's designed for campaign play, part of most campaigns I've been in, the fun part is building your characters together, sat around the table, deciding and bouncing ideas off each other. So that makes perfect sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot one thing which is totally crucial to the lore of our world. You end with naming your character, which I think people will be familiar with. But there's an extra layer of our naming convention in that every person on the world that we're playing in has a true name. And your true name is something that is like, it's a one word idea. It's very broad, and you keep it very close to the chest, because if someone has your true name, they can do a lot of damage to you. So you keep this hidden, and you present with a fluid name, and your fluid name represents your personality or your job or something that you like, or something could be totally silly. It could be very serious. And you can change your fluid name at any point in your life. And this just sort of reflects like the phase of your life that you're in. So when you make your character, you pick a fluid name, but fools don't know their true name, circumstantially or otherwise. And this is almost like a carrot at the end of a stick, because we want you to kind of go looking for it. And the Major Arcana do have those answers. So if you would like to cozy up to a Major Arcana and incite a Calamity to get your true name, you could do that.
Amazing. That sounds like an excellent calamitous thing to do. So looking through the structure of the game, the next thing it says is building the play deck. What goes into that process?
Essentially, you're going to be picking 2 suits out of 4, taking that, removing a few cards from it, 2s, aces, and then adding your 3 major arcana that are tied to your motivations. And that's going to represent your play deck. And anytime there's some sort of resolution that is required, you'll be pitching the skill that you would like to use to the GM, giving the context in which you want to use it, and then drawing from it, and either trying to draw at or under a target number, depending on your character and the circumstance.
And so we're trying to draw underneath that number, for example. What if it goes wrong? What happens? Where do we go?
If it goes wrong, there's kind of varying levels of going wrong. There
Okay.
is just plain old failing, in which you draw maybe a little bit higher than your target and it doesn't go the way that you want it to. We also have critical successes and failures. So if you draw a critical failure, the GM draws a major arcana and they use that major arcana to flavor how this goes really awry.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of an extra flavoring to it, in which the gods do get involved again when you fail or succeed spectacularly. And then there is the wild card, which is drawing a major arcana. So that's neither positive or negative, or rather, we don't prescribe that. You choose it at the
Okay.
table, and that's dependent on the situation and your relationships to the gods at that time. So if you've been particularly antagonistic with a god, it might be really interesting that when you draw them, things get even worse and weirder.
Oh no. Yeah, no, that makes sense because, like you say, the major arcana represents the gods in the game, so it means that they've entered the scene somehow, and depending on your world's lore, that may be good, that may be bad. So fantastic. So the main thing, we've talked a lot about kind of calamity and things in this game. Let's talk about inciting a kind of calamity and an example of when that would happen and what that would look like.
Sure. So, a calamity is incurred by checking off sufficient boxes in the obligation track that correlates to your major arcana, the ones associated with your motivation. So, say you're trying to accomplish something and you draw the hermit card. You're going to resolve that as a wild card in most scenarios, but then you're also going to fill in one of the checks on the obligation track. There are a few different circumstances where you're going to do this. Crit failure fills one in, crit success, drawing the major arcana. Once you fill in the obligation track for one of your major arcana, a calamity is incurred. Each major arcana has several calamities that are associated with them. So in the example I gave, the hermit, one of the calamity options is an NPC or a notable figure completely vanishes and disappears.
Oh gosh.
So the table would then collaborate to say, okay, who is really important right now? Whose disappearance would like seriously mess up the world or our goals? And that would be the calamity of the hermit, provided that you denied the hermit. If you indulged the hermit, then it would be one of your other two major arcana that provides the calamity, because they are jealous that they have not been chosen.
Well, of course, like, because they're clearly the best one. So why would you not? Fantastic. Yeah, so the obligation track is like a marker on your character sheet. How many are on there, just to give me a scale of how often a calamity is going to occur?
We're at 4 per major arcana right now.
Okay.
We started, when we were developing this game, we started at 10, and we were like, man, we need to have way more calamities, to be honest. So we're at 4 right now, and we just might chop off another one. Who knows?
Oh, okay, so you're still in the playtesting sort of phase, tweaking.
We are, yeah. We expect to have the text done by the spring-ish, just before the spring. So we have a little bit of time to playtest. And right now, what we're actively playtesting is making sure that there are enough calamities that it feels just chaotic enough that things are a little bit unpredictable for everybody.
Perfect. If people listening are interested in playtesting, is there a way they can get involved to do that? Or is there something they can follow to see updates about it?
Ooh, I am occasionally running playtests in Toronto. So if you're local in Toronto, you can follow me on social medias, and I'm posting about it. And sorry, watching these bizarre chat. So sorry, I got distracted by the chat. I won't do that again. I don't often do live streaming, so this is new to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're in Toronto, you can follow me on social media, and I often run events at like different, sometimes breweries or at different game nights. We also playtested this at Breakout Con last year, and I expect that we'll do a little bit of that again. So if you come back to Toronto in March and want to go to Breakout Con, we'll be doing that. I think the best way is to just follow me on my socials, because I'm running the game here, there, and everywhere.
Fantastic. Okay, great to know. So inciting Calamity, we're building up to the big oops again. So talk me through that stage of the game.
That's kind of the crux. At the point that the fools do realize their ultimate potential, it kind of indicates that you have reached the number of calamities that you have agreed upon with the GM, typically in session 0, that will mark the end of the game. And at that point, you really do become the fools manifesting their full potential and seeing literally the world, the final Major Arcana. And in seeing the world, you may remake it in any way that you see fit. And so does the campaign come to a conclusion. So it's a very messy, disastrous, calamitous even process of becoming the fool and reaching this moment of pure potential and influencing and never leaving the world to not ever be the same again.
Fantastic. And one thing I wanted to talk about in the game as well, because we haven't touched on this yet, is the kind of art style and direction of that, because it's got a definite style to it. So I want to talk about your inspirations and your approach to visually how the game looks.
Yeah, I think that we could probably start with the podcast as well for this, because I've been doing the artwork for the podcast since the very beginning, and in the first arc, it was quite noir and neon. And so that was sort of like the starting point of the visual identity for Planet Arcana, the podcast. And I think a significant portion of that has been ported into the work that I've done for A Fool's Errand. I'm also, I think, like many artists of my generation, have grown up on both Western animation and anime. And I think inescapably that is reflected in my art style as well. And then finally, there's a lot of influence from, very specific creators. I would say like Osamu Tezuka and Fritz Lang, one of whom directed a remake of Metropolis and one of whom directed the original Metropolis. And then finally, I think the direction that I'm hoping to go for is like very saturated in color, like I said, neon, a little bit noir, but also kind of meeting that brief of a world of androids and humans where, the androids can kind of look organic, and like they came from ancient times or from the future equally, depending on which android you are. And likewise, the humans can be very as you know them, or they can be very futuristic and have all kinds of android parts. So yeah, bouncing between those two polar ends.
Fantastic. And we had some fans of the podcast in the comments, so I just put them on the screen as well so folks can see nice. As well. So talking about the crowdfunder, as we noticed, teasingly close to funding, so it's going to kick over the line over the next few days. Is this your first crowdfunding campaign you done on Kickstarter, or have you done several before? Like, what's your experience been with like publishing and things like that?
B and I we've both participated in zine months before, so we've both done smaller ventures, both of which have gone well. I've also released one without crowdfunding it. So I've released 2 zine-sized games, and B has released. She did a twofer. She released one, but that's 2 games. It's actually 6 games and over 2 books. It's incredible. But yeah, both of us asked for like very small amounts. Like I asked for 500 Canadian dollars on my first go at it, and B asked for 800, I think, on your first go. And for this one, we're asking for 15,000, which we understand is a huge jump. And miraculously, people really showed up for it, and we are going to kick it over the finish line, which is really incredible. And it just truly is. It's remarkable. I'm so happy that people believe in it and believe in us. And yeah, it's only funding for a couple more days, but I'm feeling so great about it.
Fantastic. Absolutely. So with this bigger funding and bigger goals, what are your plans kind of for the project? So if people listening or watching are like, yeah, I'm into this, I'm gonna back this, what can they expect in terms of kind of the project timeline?
Oh, I could speak to the timeline too. We we're keeping it very simple. You can get a physical copy of the book. It's a soft cover book. It will have this absolutely gorgeous cover that's by B. It will have art by guest artists in it. And it's about 160 to 200 pages. So it is robust. And that is going for about 50 Canadian dollars. Not about 50 Canadian dollars, exactly 50 Canadian dollars.
Okay.
And as far as the timeline goes, we are wrapping this up this week, and then we expect to have the text done, like I said, in about around the start of spring, at which we'll be finishing up the art. We're working with some guest writers too, so we're bringing in all of our collaborators at that time, doing the layout, printing it over the summer, and then fulfilling by next fall. So if you pledge now, in under a year, you will have this book at your table. And we will get you the digital copy as soon as possible. And in fact, we even have a demo up right now. So you could go and look at the game immediately. It's an early version and we'll update it as we go. But there will be access to the digital copy so that you can play very, very soon.
Fantastic. Sounds great to me. Okay. Well, that all sounds really great. As I mentioned, I've seen you're so close to crossing the finish line, so I'm going to be so excited to see it happen for you, both of you, this week. Is there anything else about the campaign or the game that you'd like the chance to kind of talk about or share about? Anything we forgot to mention?
The networks.
Oh, yes. B, please.
Yeah. So it just kind of occurred to me a second ago, but the networks are quite a big part of the world. So you're going to be playing on the fifth collide, which is the landmass that has sort of 5 distinct regions. But you're also going to be able to enter the networks. And the way that we pitch this is kind of encapsulated with the phrase, what waits for us on the other side of sleep? And the answer to that is typically for androids, they go into the digital network when they sleep. Their minds kind of semi-detach from their bodies and they would enter a state of, what we would know as sleep. Humans enter the dream network, and composite beings would enter one at random. So if you're an android with human parts, sometimes you might end up in the quote unquote wrong network. For most people on the fifth collide, these places are inaccessible. But for the fools, they can enter on purpose. And it is a place of abstract reality, of alternate physics. The digital network, in essence, is the home to all of data, and the dream network is home to all of dreams and emotions. And when you reach the finality, the third tier of either network, you can have any question answered. But in order to accomplish this, you must undergo great risk and danger. So that would be like the alternate planes that you are able to play on in A Fool's Errand.
Fabulous. Sorry, just zoned out there doing some little chat moderation for a second. But yeah, okay. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about? Any of the closing words? Otherwise, I'll move on to my next questions I have lined up for you.
I think we covered so much of it. Thank you for being so thorough. The only thing I would add is that if anything that we've spoken about is interesting to you, our campaign is only running for a couple more days. So please go and check out A Fool's Errand on Kickstarter, because we need your help to kick it over the finish line. We're so close.
Absolutely, yeah. So please do, because the best way to support indie tabletop RPG creators is to buy their stuff. So if you can, please check it out and have a look there. Yeah, I'm so sure it's like teasingly close. I thought I had actually funded when I looked on it today. I was like, it's just there. So I'm
So
sure it
close.
will be. It's so close. But yeah, it looks fantastic, and I was really excited to hear about it. So I'm sure you'll fund this week, which is great to hear. So my last question for you both before we go is, do you have any other games that you'd like to kind of recommend? Maybe some that perhaps influence this game, or just some that you've been enjoying recently? And the rules are that, of course, it cannot be D&D, because this is not D&D, and it can't be a game that you've made, because we've just spent a little bit of time talking about Fool's Errand. So Jay, if I start with you.
Ooh, yeah. I am really excited to talk about the time we have. I bet that might have been B's answer, but I'm going to take it anyway because I'm going first.
Sorry.
The time we have, this is funny too because B did the logo for it. So very,
It's better
very,
that you bring this one up.
Yeah,
Well,
because that would be
exactly.
against the rules, technically.
Exactly. There you go. So the time we have is a duet card game in which you play two brothers on opposite sides of a door, and one of the brothers has turned into a zombie, and you basically play through prompts that are extremely tragic and very sad, and you just kind of like you almost find the life between these brothers and their relationship as one of them slowly turns. The game is by Elliot Davis, who is one of our favorite creators and is absolutely wonderful at game design. All of his games are my favorite games, but this one is also currently crowdfunding and is also really, really close to the goal. So must shout it out. It is such a unique and tragic and beautiful game that it's very, very worthy of your attention, and you must check it out.
That does sound very interesting, and I do want to check that out. So I'm just going to make a note of that for future guests to invite. Oh, I muted myself then. Sorry, I was saying B. What about you?
I think that I really enjoy games most of all that, especially for a one shot or like, very short campaigns, something that has an element of LARP in it, even if it's just like one tiny thing that you do in real life. I think the time we have is a great example of that, actually, because you do physically sit on opposite sides of the door. The other game I'm thinking of is one of the first indie TTRPGs I played, and the first that I played off mic, and it was with Jay and my partner, and it's called Sleepaway Camp. And I think it's optional, but you are heavily encouraged to make what I think a lot of us call a Pepe Sylvia board, like a conspiracy board, where you have like illustrations and tokens and characters' faces and names, and you create this like complex puzzle like structure that is a visual illustration of what you're playing. It's also like horror themed, which is right up my alley as well. And the way that it asks you to explore characters and the relationships to each other was kind of revolutionary for me when I played it. And I will never forget looking into my partner's eyes as his character left mine in the middle of the lake to drown. And it's just one of those moments where like you'll never understand. You had to be there, and that's like, to me, the big magic of TTRPGs. So Sleepaway Camp by Possum Creek Games, really good. Get it, play it.
I think it might be just Sleepaway, just as a
I'm so sorry. Yeah, Sleepaway. I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely. By Possum Creek Games, they're fantastic. They've been on the show a couple of times for their games, so absolutely check them out. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Those are two really great recommendations. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing A Fool's Errand with us all. Thank you to everyone that's watched and listened. If you're interested in learning about different indie tabletop RPGs, we're here every Monday talking about different ones. And as we've mentioned several times, the Kickstarter campaign for A Fool's Errand is live currently. So please do check it out if you found any of this interesting, because the best way to support them is to back and buy their stuff or share it online to other people you think might like it. But that is all for this week. So I think I'll love you and leave you all. Be back next week with another indie tabletop RPG to share with you. But Jay and B, thank you so much for coming on, and best luck with the last week of the campaign.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you
having
so
us.
much.
All right.
Yeah,
thanks so much. And thanks for everyone watching. Bye.